Good afternoon, everyone. We will call a special city council meeting to order for Tuesday, September 24, 2013. First order of business is the roll call. Heidi.
Estes. Here. Peterson. Lewis. Here. Doyle. Wright. Scott. Nordstrom. Here. Roberts. Clayton. Laurenti. Here. We have a quorum.
Okay, and now we will have our invocation. I do not see our invocator here today, so we'll just have a moment of silence, and you're welcome to rise, and you're welcome to participate, but not required.
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you, everyone. As this is a special council meeting, there's not a general public comment time. You're welcome to comment on any of the three items on the agenda today, and if you would please fill out a speaker request form. I don't see any forms over there, so when the time comes, I'll ask for public comment, and you're welcome to step up and state your name and your comment at that time. First order of business is item number 1 is to approve presentation of the 2012 audit findings and action plan, and we'll go to our City Finance Officer, Pauline Sumption. Pauline.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Actually, John Walker from Cato Thorstensen is here for that presentation.
Thank you, Mayor and council members. Our 2012 audit report draft was emailed to you a couple days ago. This process started last June and still has a few loose ends for final approval today and completion and submission to the federal government by the end of the month. In addition to that, the Department of Legislative Audit has received that same copy that you received for their review and approval this week. Overall, the audit went well. However, this year was probably in terms of the mechanics of getting through the process, was probably one of the tougher if you look at it from the standpoint of your finance office as well as us as auditors. The audit started a little later than usual. We didn't get Pauline, in terms of getting through her work, getting the financial statements for us this year. All the year-end closeout took longer. Our field work took longer. There were many changes that needed to be made along the way. You're well aware, and I have no doubt at all, that this was due to the staffing changes, or in this case, several people had left since last December, and then without being able to rehire up through this audit process, all the responsibility was basically on Pauline's back in terms of getting the normal things ready for the audit. But having said that, overall, your audit results are good. That is, there's an unqualified opinion on page 1 and 2 of the financial statements. So that's no reservations. That's what you've always gotten for the City of Rapid City. So from your standpoint as council, from third-party bondholders and anybody else that reads the audit, you got an unqualified opinion on your financial statements. There were no fraud, no irregularities that came to our attention. There were no reservations, exceptions, scope limitations, nothing that prohibited us from carrying out our normal auditing procedures. No problems, disputes, disagreements with management, that is finance personnel, in terms of how we go about our audit procedures. There's always a lot of consultation, and this year there was as much, if not more, in terms of certain accounting transactions, certain accounting principles, how to apply them, how to make sure they're properly reported in your financial statement. But those were followed through and resolved to our satisfaction. As you know, your audit report, all of 151 pages, is a complex and detailed document. But in general, your audit report is laid out in the same format and content that it's always has been in the past. It has the same detailed information in it, just updated, of course, for current numbers. Has the same detailed supplemental information and the same detailed statistical data that's always been included in your financials. One small change is that the solid waste MRF fund, which was always presented separately as a major program along with your other major programs, although required up to a couple years ago, was optional the last couple years, and this year Finance Office opted to not disclose it separately, so it's just combined with all the other smaller funds of the city. One other significant addition is the capitalization of interest. The water project being so large now, accounting principles required the capitalization of the interest relating to the financing of that project to be included along with the total costs of that project. Otherwise, accounting principles remained basically the same. There was one new governmental accounting standard, not near as comprehensive as the one the year before, and there is one new one coming up for 13, but again, not in any big way, but takes a little TLC in terms of communication, auditor, and finance office to make sure everything gets updated and changed appropriately. There were no prior period adjustments, that is, no changes that reflected in the 2011, that is the prior year. Now this is, I make that statement, that is the normal, although a year ago there were some changes that came up during 2011 that had affected prior years. So this year I'm happy to report there were no problems with any carry forward from the prior year. There were no debt covenant violations in terms of all your debt requirements. Accounting estimates remain the same. That is, a number of the things that are involved with recording assets and liabilities for the city remain the same. Process of determining, like allowance for bad debts, reserve for landfill liability, depreciation expense, your OPEB liability, your pension liability, some of the TID obligations as regard to the estimated repayment schedules. All of those aren't necessarily black and white, but it takes a process to go through. You were consistent in your process and estimating of those assets and liabilities. There was no unusual contingencies recorded in the audit. There's always a note on contingencies, a general blanket note that there are from time to time normally lawsuits or potential lawsuits hanging over the city. Insurance normally is covering, so there's just a general comment in there that if a reader so choose would have to inquire further if they wanted to investigate any particular item. There is a note that describes several deficit fund balances that are in your financial statements. A couple of them are the normal TID accounts that just by their nature, until they're fully paid for, are deficit. But a couple of them, also the workman comp deficit continued, and a new one this year, the liability insurance fund, was deficit. So it'll take some attention by finance office in terms of future budgeting to get those back in the black again. And as has been the last several years, there was disclosure as a few budget overdrafts, I think a handful or so, in one of the notes to the financial statement. So again, almost every year a process go through to try to make sure that everything is covered budget-wise, but there were a few of them that were overspent. One of the big parts in the audit towards the back is all the federal audit compliance, the A133 work that we do. This year, as in prior years, although one program was different, you had 5 different programs that took special attention by us as auditors to audit them. I'm happy to report that you received an unqualified opinion on compliance over those programs. Now, there was one minor compliance problem. That is, the CDBG program had a new report that they failed to actually file, but we considered that a minor exception in regard to not having to qualify the overall opinion. There were no question costs. That is, items that were spent that wouldn't be eligible for grant reimbursement, so that's very positive. There were 2 findings in regard to your federal financing. Both of them are basically repeats of the prior audit, although in the first case, there was substantial improvement. The first item was on the preparation of the schedule of federal expenditures. We still had to make some small adjustments to that schedule. That's where you reiterate all the different federal funds that you have, and it's a special page in the audit report. In terms of revenue recognition, sometimes it gets down to that year-end close and things weren't perfectly done to get the total amount of revenue and related expense reported. So we again had to make that a comment, but I want to make a point that in terms of finance office personnel, it definitely was an improvement over the prior year. And I would suggest that Pauline having to go through and do that herself this year due to staff turnover probably was an eye-opener in terms of some of the detail that it took to really get to that. So that will be, from a positive standpoint, I think that'll be that'll work in your favor in future years for her to help train new personnel how to do it and then to be able to review it more accurately herself. The other comment in regard to federal funds was on monitoring. This comment is also a repeat comment. As you well know, your federal funds are basically handled by many different departments, and including the finance office in terms of monitoring it. But as we recommended in the prior year, you should have a more centralized process to a tracking system, a tickler system, to determine what each federal requirements are, who's responsible for preparing those reports or monitoring the compliance, and then somebody, the key things, somebody reviewing to make sure they're done timely, and done accurately. Now again, not that we found major problems. Earlier on I did mention there was one report that didn't get filed. So it's kind of just more of a heads up in terms of future to avoid problems. And I think this is something that once staffing gets back to normal for the finance office, it's my understanding that the attention can be given to that process. One area, another additional area in the report is our report on GAO compliance, general accounting compliance, that is with just general laws and regulations, not the federal side, but anything else. And I'm happy to report that was an unqualified opinion with one minor exception, that is the budget overdrafts that I mentioned earlier are referred to in that report. And then finally, as part of any audit, and certainly your audit of the city, we review internal controls. 2012 internal controls, segregation of duties, remain strong as they have in the past. Your turnover, just in recalls, really started right towards the end of 2012, so you had a pretty stable staff in terms of carrying out most of 2012. So I don't have any specific recommendations for changes in controls or segregation of duties, other than as an auditor, I always remind you that you should challenge yourself to make the processes and procedures in place. Should they change? Do they need to change? And then especially when you have changes in people or processes, and in your case, people. So 2013, I'm sure there's been a lot of challenges for finance office to determine who's doing what and have that review system in place. There is 2 audit findings in relation to general internal controls. Both of those are repeats from the prior year. They have to do with your financial statement preparation and the related closeout of the end of the year and getting all the accounting adjustments done. They're in 2 separate comments, but I could just kind of combine them into one comment here for presentation. Basically, this goes back to the change in personnel started last December. Well, that's also when the closeout for the year starts. That's also when the financial statement preparation starts in the early part of the 13, and then getting ready for our audit in the spring. And people were gone. So the responsibility then was primarily on Pauline's lap in terms of doing that whole process. I will say that in general, the process was cleaner than the year before, but there were still a number of places where we needed to make adjustments, needed to make some disclosure changes in the financial statements. We worked through with Pauline on those and got those adjusted. There were still some accounts that didn't get fully analyzed in terms of their effect. Now, we can tell in a big picture way that that's not overly material to the financial statements of the city, but there are some things in terms of due diligence that finance office needs to go through on some of the accruals and make sure they are more exact. A few of the subsidiary detailed listings didn't quite tie to the master list, the control list, but very small areas. But it kept telling us the general tone was the same, that there was a lot of work that needed to be done to get things closed out with one person basically trying to do it and nobody reviewing it. So our recommendation, obviously, when you have when you get fully staffed again, will be to put that process back in place where everything is delegated to a responsible, trained individual to get that done, and then Pauline in her position would be reviewing that whole process. That is a summary of the 2012 audit report. Any questions that I could field?
Any questions for Mr. Walker? Okay, we have a motion to approve by Lewis and a second by Peterson. And we'll go to Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just wanted to point out that we have since filled the position for the grants compliance and financial reporting manager. He's actually he started Monday, Dave Uhas. So hopefully he will help this process next year. I have high hopes for him, and he's already aware of that. So I just want to let you know that he was here as well.
Richie Nordstrom.
Not so much questions for Mr. Walker, but I appreciate the heads up that you're giving us. And I also want to applaud Pauline for her diligence and making every effort to bring forward a good, clean audit. And I understand the staffing levels will be adjusted. And hopefully when the 2015 budget comes around, you'll make some other additional suggestions for us for the review in that budgeting process. Some of the items that you mentioned, Mr. Walker, is that we're just a little bit shy of, or you're giving us heads up on some things. The CDBG filing, which is an area of interest for me because I think our staff needs a little, just a little guidance in that area, maybe a little assistance. Can you expound on that area just a little bit further?
Really, it was one and only one of many reports that they have to file that was, I believe, a new requirement, a new requirement they weren't aware apparently that needed to be filed. So we've had some communication. I don't know yet if it has been filed. We can follow up on that, but that would be the cure, is to file that report and then put a procedure in place, obviously, to make sure that's done then on an annual basis.
I see. And we're just, is this how do I want to say this? Is that this report is an annual report? Are we missing it by several months, a few weeks, a short time frame?
Well, it wasn't filed for 2012. Pauline, do you remember the due date? I'm not sure I remember.
I believe this requirement actually came into play in 2011. And at that time, there was a glitch in the HUD program that even if Barb had signed on to do the report, she was not able to do it there because the website wouldn't let her. So I'm not sure if that glitch still exists
Yes,
or not.
I think you're right. And then there was no review of it in 2012 to see whether it should be filed and try to file it. So we can follow up to see that it has been filed at this point.
Now that you're saying that, I recall that being a glitch on the web system. Thank you for the reminder. You mentioned also follow-ups, and I thank you for reminding me of that as well. Follow-ups, do you see a time frame when you need to do a follow-up, if there are any follow-ups?
Nothing would be specifically required at this point. All of it would be followed up in the 2013 audit unless you so directed to be done at a sooner time. So it would be basically next summer when the 2013 audit is done, unless you would direct it to be done on a sooner basis.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. Appreciate it. And thank you, Pauline, for the job and efforts that you put forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Richie, and we'll go back to Pauline Sumption.
Thank you, Mayor. I would be remiss if I left out Tracy Davis. She helped me with some of the year-end closing statements, and also she is acted as the liaison between the finance office and the auditors this year, and also the other staff throughout the city that provided the information to Cato Thorstensen.
Any further discussion or comments? We do have a motion on the floor for approval. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Item number 2, this is to approve a request for funding of up to $500,000 for a cost analysis for new Civic Center Arena, and we'll go to our finance officer, Pauline Sumption. Pauline, if you just briefly present the options that you found.
Thank you, Mayor. As my memo states, in my opinion, there's basically 3 places that we could fund up to $500,000 as a loan. I would not recommend doing anything other than a loan. It would be repaid from the vision funds in the next round of project funding. Those 3 places, and I will probably just put them in the order of my preference, would be the CIP fund through the undesignated cash there, through the general fund, undesignated cash, or through SAB 28. The reason why I recommend the CIP fund first is because that has a like purpose to the vision fund. There's also about $2 million of undesignated cash in that fund right now. If you look at the 5-year project plan, which is a fluid plan, we'd like to keep $1 million in there, and at the end of the 5 years, it brings it down to $700,000 currently. However, with the next round of vision funding, it would be repaid in 2016, and so we would still maintain that $1 million balance. General fund also has about $2 million in undesignated cash as of the end of August, and then SAB 28 has about $3 million there.
SAB 28 also has some other obligations, correct?
That is correct. We have already looked at SAB 28 to fund a loan for the drainage fund for next year. And there had been discussion about possibly using that for the financial software package that we're looking at. However, I am leaning more towards an outside loan on that at this point.
Thank you, Pauline. We'll go to Steve Laurenti. We do not have a motion on the floor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I would like to make the motion to take the funds as a loan from the CIP funds to be repaid by the vision funds.
We have a motion by Laurenti and a second by Doyle to take the money from capital improvements to be repaid for by the vision funds. Okay. Any discussion on that motion? Any discussion? No discussion. Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. I'll give it a try here. I'm looking at this, and I highly encourage the council to take a look at the CIP because of what Pauline described as a like fund. The other 2 areas that you pointed out, Pauline, is the undesignated cash as being a second option. Did I understand that correctly?
The second option would be undesignated cash from the general fund. The first option is the undesignated cash from the CIP fund.
And then the SAB is more along the line of assessments, is my correct?
Correct. That's more for assessed projects. And I know that Public Works, at least the current Public Works Director, has considered doing more assessed projects like the sidewalks that get ordered in. Those would be considered an assessed project that we would have to fund up front.
And when you're describing the CIP as a like fund, can you elaborate on that a little bit further? Because I'm looking for precedent here in how we use the CIP.
Okay. Vision Fund and CIP Fund are both for capital improvement type projects. That's what those 2 funds are for. So whether it's infrastructure or a soccer park, they're a like item, they're capital improvements. Now, saying that, state statute allows you to do internal loans technically from any fund to another fund. So I guess I am not so worried about precedent as to what I think is just most appropriate in this case.
Thank you. I'll yield the floor.
Thank you. If there's no other council members who would like to speak, I'd like to say just a few words. I'll pass the gavel to Mr. Lewis. Done. Anyway, first of all, as you know, our department heads are empowered to speak their minds, and Pauline has issued her professional opinion, and my opinion is that the SAB 28 fund is the fund that offers the least risk of sidelining other important projects. I'll throw out there as an example the water line breaks that we've seen on the south end of town over the last couple of years, and part of that's funded from the water enterprise funds, but the capital improvements portion or the streets portion are funded from CIP emergency funds. And so my concern is that taking up to $500,000 from this fund potentially undercuts the argument that we've been making to the community that we are spending everything we can on streets, and I believe that we are. And if these funds, which are emergency funds, were truly liquid, that they would have been already programmed for street improvement. So I think that with that being said, I think the best option is the SAB 28 fund as a loan. But I do appreciate the discussion and the recommendation from finance. Any further comments? We'll go to Charity Doyle, and then we'll go to Richie.
Thank you, Mayor. Question for Pauline, if I may.
You may.
Pauline, based on what the mayor has just said, could you explain to us what process we would go through if there was to be an emergency type of situation, CIP-wise?
Quite honestly, if there's an emergency that we would have to tap CIP funds, it's probably going to be large enough where we're going to have to figure out where to tap funds in general. I had an email earlier asking about a catastrophic event, and I said, well, quite honestly, if there's a catastrophic event, we're going to be pulling money from every fund we can to get that problem fixed. We do have contingency money in CIP for some of those things. I know with the plan being fluid, unlike the Vision Fund plan, there is some room to shift projects if absolutely necessary. But I also know that we're looking at a 2-year time frame here as far as when the money will, 2.5 tops, as far as when the money will be issued out and be repaid. And based on our previous history, we've always been able to make those emergency things happen with a slight shift if necessary, but nothing where it pushes projects out for years that I've seen.
So your recommendation took all of that into consideration?
Correct.
Thank you.
And we'll go to Bonnie. Did you want to speak? No? We'll go back to Richie.
Thank you, Mayor. Although you have a good idea about bringing this up out as SAB, I think we glossed over something that we may have missed here, is the reason why this has to come up as a loan. Pauline, if I may, one of the reasons why we're looking at a loan versus coming out of the Vision Fund is why?
Because with the Civic Center being an enterprise fund, any operational type expenses would typically, generally be paid by the Civic Center. Normally, their capital improvements are also paid through the Civic Center Enterprise Fund. I don't think that for lack of a better term, grant, where it does not have to be repaid, would be appropriate from any of these funds, just because we don't typically pay for anything Civic Center related out of general fund. We don't typically pay for anything Civic Center related out of the CIP fund or the SAB 28 fund. It typically comes out of the Vision Fund.
And because we don't have enough money in the Vision Fund,
We have to have a loan.
It has to go through a loan. I just wanted to make sure the public understood that's why they're looking for a loan. And if you can remind us on the CIP, we've only got like one project that is behind schedule because of waterline brittle being an issue, or maybe I should ask this question of Terry.
That would be a Mr. Wolterstorff question.
If I may, Terry, just elaborate on the question is that one of the issues or one of the projects we're behind on in the CIP, because I hear a little bit of concern that bringing up money or getting a loan from the CIP may be an issue, but if I understand that we only have one project on our CIP list that is in current process of construction, it is behind schedule, and that's the Harmony Lane. That's a report that we got at CIP meeting. Sorry if you're...
I think we might be getting a little bit off track here, but
Yeah,
go ahead, Terry.
And I'll
Generally
explain why.
speaking, projects are on schedule. I mean, some lag behind a little bit. We've got right-of-way acquisition, that type of stuff that we are always struggling through on any particular project, it seems like. But I think we anticipate all of our projects being out to bid this year that were scheduled for 2013.
And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because there is some concern about dipping into the CIP funding source as a loan. And so I just wanted to explain that according to what I'm hearing is that CIP is okay as being a source for coming up with for a loan. So as far as you're concerned, the CIP projects, we're still okay.
Well, I might pass the buck back to the finance officer on that question. But generally speaking, I heard some of the discussion when I was back in my office. You know, we never know what projects may pop up out of the blue, particularly when we're dealing with utility projects. Last year we had some big problems down on Ivy, where we had to do an emergency project and do a water main replacement over there. But anytime we do water main replacement, inevitably we have street repair that comes with it. So it's a guessing game.
Thank you. I'll yield the floor.
Thank you, Richie. We'll go to Brad Estes.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm going to support this motion, and I ask my fellow council people to support it also. I just think that if there is an emergency, we'll get together and we'll figure out how to handle it, number one. Number two is, with all due respect to the people in our community wanting to know that we're going to do everything we can about our roads, is we got to figure out what this elephant in the room is going to cost. And we have to walk through this door to get there. And we just keep delaying it in my mind. And the next round of vision funds, I think we have two very large price tag items to discuss, and that's the Civic Center and our streets in this town. And respectfully, Mr. Mayor, if I thought we needed or you or I thought we needed another $500,000 to do street projects this year, we probably should have took a better look at the CPI. So, thank you.
Any further discussion on the motion? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, everyone. We'll go to item number 3. This is an update on the petition to intervene and a motion for reconsideration in the DENR PowerTech USA application for a large-scale mine permit. And we'll go to Ryan Soy. Can you give us an update on yesterday's hearing? Or Joel Landine, our city attorney.
Thank you, Mayor. We just wanted to put this on the agenda and update you on what had happened. We had filed a petition to intervene that was initially denied last week at a hearing by the South Dakota Board of Minerals and Environment. And we had filed a motion last week to have them reconsider that. And Mr. Soy from my office had provided some authority to the chairman of the board and the rest of the board supporting our request to intervene. Yesterday, at the beginning of the contested hearing in front of the Board of Minerals and Environment, they reversed their previous decision and did allow the city to be an intervener. The effect of that decision is that the resolution that the city council passed expressing concern about the proposed project is now going to be included in the formal record. That's really the only update I had, unless you have any additional questions.
We have a motion by Lewis to acknowledge and a second by Laurenti. Any discussion on the motion to acknowledge item number 3? Richie Nordstrom.
Thank you, Mayor. I had the privilege of attending most of that session that was taking place yesterday, and I applaud Ryan for making the presentation. And However, I wasn't able to be in the room when you made your comments, but I knew what you were going to say anyway. So the other side of what happened there is that the other cities that were and other government agencies were also included in that. I'm searching for the word that was allowed. The Board of Minerals decided to first go around to not allow us to make our presentation. When they reversed that decision to allow us, they also included other municipalities and other government agencies to make their presentations as well. So we broke the dam for them. So good job. Thanks.
Any further discussion on the motion to acknowledge? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We have a motion to adjourn. Motion by Doyle, second by Peterson. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. We're adjourned. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon.